So I recently went through something that still feels unreal. You know those moments when you think you're finally free, finally at peace, and then someone comes along to remind you that peace doesn't last forever. That's exactly what happened when I bought my little cabin in the valley. To me, it wasn't just wood, nails, and a roof. It was a dream, a quiet escape from the noise, the traffic, and the endless demands of city life. I wanted nothing more than to breathe in the mountain air, listen to the creek run by the pines, and finally feel invisible, hidden away, safe. But safety is never what it seems. The first time I saw her, I should have known. She stood there at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, sunglasses perched on her nose like she was scanning enemy territory. I didn't know her name yet, but I felt it. That energy. The kind that tells you someone is about to make your life miserable for no reason other than they can. She didn't wave, she didn't smile. She just stared as if my very existence on that patch of land offended her. I brushed it off. After all, I wasn't here to make friends. I was here for solitude. But solitude doesn't survive when someone decides you don't belong. The first note came 3 days later, slipped under my door, folded neatly like it was some kind of official warning. Your cabin is in violation of HOA standards. Remove unapproved structures immediately. My heart pounded reading it, not because it made sense, but because it didn't. My cabin wasn't in any HOA. That's the reason I bought it, far away from rules, fines, and people telling me what color my shutters had to be. Still, I told myself maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe she sent it to the wrong address. I set the note aside. But mistakes don't show up 3 times in a row, each one harsher, bolder, angrier. Failure to comply will result in police action. Police action. Against me. For a cabin I owned outright. For land that didn't even touch HOA jurisdiction. The 4th day, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. 2 black and white cruisers pulled up. The red and blue lights flickered against the trees, bouncing off the window panes, washing my walls in color like a warning siren I couldn't ignore. I froze. For a moment I thought maybe I was dreaming. How could this be real? 2 officers stepped out, their boots heavy on the dirt. One adjusted his belt. The other scanned the porch, the windows, the roof, like they were checking for crimes that didn't exist. "Sir," one said, "we've had reports of an unpermitted residence on this property." Unpermitted, my stomach dropped. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to prove them wrong all at once. My voice cracked as I said, "This is my cabin, my land. There's no HOA here." But when they asked for proof, I realized I'd left the deed in a lockbox inside. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys. Behind them, at the end of the driveway, she stood again. That woman, arms crossed, sunglasses reflecting the scene like some kind of twisted victory. For a split second, I wondered, what gives people like her that much power? To smile while watching someone's peace unravel, to summon sirens and uniforms over nothing. I found the papers, shoved them into the officer's hands. My voice shook with anger I tried to hide. They scanned, nodded, and the tension shifted. One officer cleared his throat, embarrassed. The other glanced back at her, then back at me. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're outside HOA jurisdiction." But she didn't flinch. Didn't apologize. She just turned, walked away slowly like this was only the beginning of her game. And something in me knew she wasn't done yet. Because people like her never stop. Not until karma teaches them what ownership really means. Have you ever felt watched in your own home? That uneasy awareness that someone's eyes are on you, judging, waiting for you to slip? That's how it felt in the valley after that night. I couldn't step onto my porch without glancing down the road, half expecting her silhouette to be there. She had planted herself into my quiet world like a weed that refuses to die. At first, I told myself maybe it was over. The officers left, the paperwork proved everything, and common sense would tell anyone to just move on. But common sense doesn't exist when power is the only thing someone craves. The next morning, I woke to hammering, not from my cabin, but from the edge of the tree line. She was driving wooden stakes into the ground, bright orange tape fluttering in the breeze like tiny flags of war. I walked closer, careful, cautious, because something about her posture told me confrontation was inevitable. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. She didn't even glance up. "Surveying," she said flatly. "You're on HOA land, I'm marking the boundaries." Her certainty made my skin crawl. How could someone be so confident in a lie? I wanted to shout, to throw the deed in her face again, but anger only feeds people like her. So I bit my tongue and walked away. But she wasn't done. 2 days later, I heard voices outside. Loud, official. I looked out my window to see a truck from the county parked in my driveway. Two men in reflective vests were talking to her, nodding while she gestured wildly toward my cabin. I stepped outside, heart pounding. "Can I help you?" I asked. One of them turned, clipboard in hand. "Ma'am here filed a complaint, says your septic system is non-compliant, will need to inspect." My jaw clenched. I didn't even have a septic system. My cabin used an eco-friendly compost setup, fully permitted when I bought the land. But she didn't care. She wasn't after truth. She was after pressure. Every complaint, every accusation was a stone she was hurling, hoping one would finally break through. When they left, finding nothing wrong, she stood at the road again, watching. Not with defeat, with calculation, like a chess player setting up her next move. And then came the whispers. Neighbors I barely knew started avoiding me. At the little gas station down the highway, a cashier I'd spoken with before wouldn't meet my eye. It didn't take long to hear why. She'd been telling anyone who would listen that I was building illegally, destroying protected land, that I was some outsider who thought he was above the law. Lies spread faster than truth in small towns. But what gnawed at me most wasn't the lies, it was the silence. No one asked me. No one came to my door. They just let the rumors hang, heavy and poisonous like fog in the valley. One night I sat on the porch listening to the creek, trying to steady my breath. And that's when the headlights came again, another cruiser. My stomach turned cold. This time it wasn't about permits. The officer stepped out slowly, hand on his flashlight. "We got a call," he said. "Report of trespassing, suspect with a firearm on this property." My chest went tight, a firearm on my land. It wasn't just harassment anymore, she was escalating, painting me as dangerous, unstable, the kind of person who shouldn't be left alone. I showed him the cabin, the empty rooms, the hunting rifle locked away untouched. His eyes softened like he knew. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew. And still, procedure demanded he write his report, file it, keep the wheel turning. When he left, the valley felt colder, the stars sharper. I sat awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying it all. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the frustration, a spark of resolve lit up. Because here's the thing, people like her count on silence. They count on you being too tired, too broken, too afraid to fight back. They thrive when you retreat, but I wasn't about to retreat, not in my own valley. The next morning I drove into town. I went to the courthouse. I pulled every record, every deed, every zoning map tied to my property. And as I traced the lines, the signatures, the boundaries on paper, something inside me shifted. Because she wasn't just wrong. She wasn't just harassing me. She was blind to a truth that had been sitting under her nose all along. My cabin wasn't a tiny speck at the edge of HOA land. It wasn't even close. My deed stretched further, much further, and as I held that stack of papers in my hands, I realized the irony. She had spent weeks trying to strip me of belonging, to shove me out of a space she thought she controlled. But the truth, the land she was standing on, the road she parked her SUV on, even some of the trees she used as her boundaries, they weren't hers. They were mine. And when the moment came when she finally pushed too far, she was going to learn a lesson she'd never forget. Because sometimes karma doesn't arrive with sirens. Sometimes it arrives with a signature, a piece of paper, and the weight of truth no one can argue against. Do you know what it feels like to live in a place you love, yet feel like a stranger in it? That's how the valley began to feel after weeks of her games. Every sound became sharper. Every car that slowed on the gravel road made my chest tighten. Peace, the one thing I came here for, was slipping through my fingers. I tried ignoring her. I tried going about my days as if her eyes weren't always on me, as if the complaints weren't piling up at the county office. But ignoring poison doesn't cure it. It just spreads. One evening, as the sun burned low behind the ridgeline, I found something new on my porch. A bright yellow slip of paper, stamped in bold letters, violation notice. Only this time it wasn't handwritten. It looked official. Failure to remove unauthorized dwelling, it read. Immediate compliance required. My blood ran cold. She had escalated again, this time forging documents to scare me. My hands shook as I read it over and over, the rage building with every line. She wasn't just trying to bother me anymore. She wanted me gone. And the cruelest part? Some small voice in my head wondered if maybe it would be easier to just leave. Pack up, sell the place, let her win. Isn't that what so many people do when faced with constant pressure? You start to question yourself. Question whether peace is worth the fight. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the window, watching the stars flicker between the treetops, and asked myself, why is she doing this? What kind of emptiness inside someone makes them spend their days chasing another person with lies and threats? But then I thought about my father, about the long drives we used to take through the countryside when I was a kid. He'd always say, land is more than dirt, it's freedom, and freedom is the only thing you never let someone take without a fight. His voice echoed in my mind, steady, unshakable, and I knew I wasn't leaving, not for her, not for anyone. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, one who specialized in property law. When I laid out the stack of deeds, maps, and survey records on his desk, his eyebrows lifted. She doesn't have a leg to stand on, he said firmly. If anything, she's trespassing on your land. These boundaries aren't just in your favor, they're ironclad. Hearing it from him steadied me. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground under my feet again. Strong, solid, mine. But the valley wasn't done testing me. 2 days later, I heard shouting outside. I stepped out to see her standing near the edge of my creek, phone in hand, screaming into it like she was reporting a crime in progress. When she saw me, her voice rose even higher. There he is, that's him. He's threatening me on my own property. I froze, disbelief washing over me. Threatening her, on her property? My fists clenched, but I didn't move. I just stood still, silent, while she spun her performance. Because that's what it was, a performance loud enough to echo through the valley, meant for the neighbors, meant for anyone listening. And sure enough, an hour later, another cruiser rolled up. Same officer as before. He looked tired, weary, like he already knew how this would go. She says you threatened her, he explained, not even trying to mask the doubt in his voice. I shook my head slowly. Officer, I haven't said a word to her. He nodded once, scribbled something on his pad, and turned back toward his car. No arrests, no charges, just another report to file, another game to fuel her obsession. As he drove away, I saw her again, standing at the road, lips curved into the faintest smile. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't just trying to push me out. She was trying to break me down piece by piece, turning the valley into a prison, hoping I'd lock myself inside with fear. But she didn't know the truth, not yet. That evening, I spread the maps out on my table again. The lines were clear. Her property was a fraction of mine. The valley floor, the ridges, even sections of the forest she treated as her playground, they weren't hers. They were all covered under my deed, and sooner or later that truth would come out. I ran my hand over the old parchment, tracing the boundary lines. I thought of every insult, every forged paper, every false call she had made. And instead of anger, I felt something else rising. A strange calm, because I realized something important. Karma doesn't need rushing. It doesn't need pushing. It waits, quietly, patiently, until the moment someone's lies finally collapse under the weight of truth. And as I folded the deed back into its envelope, I smiled for the first time in weeks. Not because the fight was over, but because I knew the ending wasn't hers to write. It was mine. Have you ever been pushed so far that silence no longer feels like strength but like surrender? That's where I was. Weeks of false reports, forged notices, and whispered lies had turned my valley into a battlefield. Only this wasn't the kind of battle you fought with fists or weapons. It was the kind you fought with patience, with evidence, with every ounce of dignity you had left. One morning, I woke to the sound of heavy engines. When I stepped outside, my jaw dropped. Parked along the dirt road were 3 HOA trucks. Bright logos splashed across their doors, clipboards in hand, workers already unloading equipment. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. One man looked up. "We've been instructed to clear non-compliant structures. Start with the cabin." The words hit like a hammer. Start with the cabin, my home. And there she was again, standing at the end of the road, sunglasses gleaming, lips curved in that same thin smile. She wasn't just testing boundaries anymore. She was coming for everything. I stepped closer, my pulse pounding. "This cabin is mine, this land is mine, you have no jurisdiction here." But she only shrugged. "That's not what the paperwork says." Paperwork, the same forged kind she had slipped under my door. The same kind she had waved around town to poison people against me. The workers hesitated, unsure. I saw it in their faces. They didn't want to be part of this. And maybe that hesitation saved me. Because in that moment, I pulled the envelope from my jacket, the deed, the maps, the documents stamped and signed decades before she even set foot in this valley. "You want paperwork?" I said, holding it high. "Here's paperwork." They froze, glancing from her to me, their uncertainty growing. She scoffed, waving them off, but the crack in her armor was visible now. For the first time, she wasn't entirely sure. Still, the trucks rumbled away, leaving dust in the air and tension behind. And as the valley grew quiet again, I realized this was no longer about annoyance. She had crossed a line. She was willing to destroy everything I'd built just to prove she could. That night, I sat alone in the cabin, staring at the deed on the table. The flicker of the oil lamp cast shadows across the paper, and I thought about what it meant. This wasn't just proof of ownership. It was history, legacy. A document tying me to this valley in a way she couldn't erase, no matter how many lies she told. But the question gnawed at me. Why? Why was she so obsessed with controlling land that wasn't hers? Was it ego, power, or was it something deeper, something broken inside her? Sometimes people like her don't just want control. They need it. It's the only way they feel important, the only way they feel seen. And when someone like me refuses to bow, it shatters the illusion they've built their lives on. A few days later, the phone rang. It was my lawyer. "She's filed a lawsuit," he said. "Claims your cabin encroaches on HOA territory. She's asking for a forced removal." My stomach dropped. A lawsuit. Real, official, backed by the system. This wasn't just harassment anymore, it was a war. But then his voice softened. "Don't worry, I've reviewed everything. Once this goes before a judge, the truth will speak for itself." The truth, those words echoed in my chest. Because truth doesn't always arrive when you want it. It arrives when the lies grow too heavy to stand, and hers were buckling under the weight. The weeks leading to the court date were a blur of tension. Every knock on the door made my heart race. Every drive into town was met with whispers, stares, cold shoulders. She had built herself into the story of the valley, the woman defending the rules against the outlaw who refused to comply. But stories only hold power until the ending changes, and mine was about to. The morning of the hearing, I drove into town with the envelope resting on the passenger seat. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than I realized, knuckles pale against the leather. I wasn't just carrying paper. I was carrying the weight of weeks of fear, humiliation, and anger. She was already there when I arrived. Standing tall outside the courthouse, flanked by 2 HOA board members, her confidence radiated like a shield. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw certainty. The certainty of someone who believed she had already won. But what she didn't know was that this wasn't her stage anymore. This wasn't her game. For the first time, the spotlight was about to shine where it belonged, on the truth. Inside, the courtroom felt colder than I expected. The judge sat high, gavel resting like a quiet promise. Her lawyer spoke first, painting me as a squatter, a rule breaker, someone trying to outsmart the system. Her words dripped with poison, each sentence carefully crafted to paint me as the villain. And then it was my turn. I stood slowly, envelope in hand, heart pounding so loud I thought the walls might hear it. My voice shook at first, but steadied with every word. I laid the documents out, one by one, each line, each boundary, each signature echoing louder than any accusation she had thrown. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that tells you people are holding their breath. Even the judge leaned forward, eyes scanning the maps carefully. And then the moment came. His gavel tapped once firm. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. "This cabin, this land, does not fall under HOA jurisdiction. In fact," he paused, looking directly at her, "the records show that the valley itself, including the access road your community uses, belongs to him." The words hung in the air like thunder. Her face went pale, lips trembling, sunglasses finally removed, revealing eyes wide with shock. For the first time, she had no script, no smug smile, no weapon to swing. Because karma had arrived, not with anger, not with shouting, but with the undeniable weight of truth. Have you ever watched someone's world collapse in front of them? Not with fire, not with noise, but with silence. That's what it felt like in that courtroom the moment the judge's words cut through. For weeks, she had carried herself like the queen of the valley, dictating, demanding, smiling at her own power. But as the truth landed, her crown shattered. She froze in her chair, papers clutched in her hands like they could shield her, eyes darting to her lawyer as if begging him to fix what couldn't be fixed. But there was no fixing it, not this time. The judge continued, his voice calm, steady, almost heavy with finality. "This court recognizes the plaintiff's claims as invalid. The defendant not only owns the cabin but holds legal ownership of the surrounding valley, including access roads and adjacent woodland. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Board members shifted uncomfortably. Her lawyer leaned back, shoulders slumping. And she sat still, lips pressed into a thin, trembling line as if reality itself had betrayed her. When the gavel struck, the sound echoed like thunder in my chest. Case dismissed. I should have felt triumphant. I should have wanted to smile, to bask in the vindication. But what I felt was something different, something deeper, relief. The kind that makes your shoulders finally drop after weeks of carrying invisible weights. As people shuffled out, I caught glimpses. Neighbors who had avoided me now looking my way, some with shame in their eyes, others with curiosity, as if wondering who I really was. The same whispers she had started now turned on her. And maybe that was justice too, in its own quiet way. Outside, the sun was bright, the courthouse steps warm under my boots. She stood a few feet away, sunglasses back on, arms crossed tight against her chest. For the first time, she didn't speak, didn't threaten. She just glared, a storm trapped behind glass. I walked past her slowly, envelope still in hand. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Sometimes silence is louder than victory. But as I drove back into the valley, back to the trees and the creek and the cabin that had almost been ripped away, I realized something important. Winning in court didn't erase the damage she had tried to cause. It didn't erase the fear, the sleepless nights, the endless harassment. And it didn't erase the truth about people like her, because they don't stop. Not really. They retreat, they lick their wounds, and they wait for another chance to strike. The valley was mine. The land, the roads, the forest, they all bore my name. But peace was something I'd have to protect. The first few days after the hearing were quiet. Too quiet. No trucks, no forged notices, no police cars in the driveway. I woke up to the sound of birds instead of engines, and for the first time in weeks, I drank my coffee on the porch without looking over my shoulder. But the valley had changed. When I drove into town, eyes followed me differently now. People who once avoided me gave small nods, hesitant smiles. A man at the gas station who hadn't spoken to me in weeks finally said, "Heard you showed her. Good on you." It felt strange. Vindication tastes different than you imagine. It's not sweet. It's not triumphant. It's heavy. Because you realize how fragile reputation can be, how quickly people turn when they only hear one side of the story. And yet, there was dignity in the wait, because I hadn't just proven her wrong. I had held my ground without becoming what she wanted me to be, angry, reckless, out of control. One evening, as the sky turned gold over the ridgeline, I walked down to the creek. The water ran clear, sunlight dancing across its surface. I crouched down, letting the cold splash over my hands, and thought about everything that had happened. And I asked myself, what do you do when karma finally comes around? Do you celebrate, do you gloat, or do you just breathe? Because the truth is, dignity isn't about proving people wrong. It's about standing tall when everything in you wants to crumble. It's about holding on to silence until the moment truth speaks for you. But peace is never permanent. 3 nights later, I saw headlights again, not police this time, her SUV. It stopped at the edge of my driveway, engine idling. I stood on the porch, waiting, heart steady but guarded. The door opened. She stepped out slowly, no sunglasses this time, her face bare under the moonlight. For a long moment, she just looked at me, as if searching for words that didn't exist. And then she turned, got back into the car, and drove away without a sound. It wasn't surrender, not quite, it was something else. A recognition, maybe, that the game was over, that the valley wasn't hers to control. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the last time she'd try. People like her don't disappear. They wait, they plot, they find new ways to test the walls of your patience. The difference now was, I wasn't afraid. Because the valley was mine, the peace was mine, and no amount of harassment, no army of forged papers or false calls could change that. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't the ones we fight with fists. They're the ones we fight with silence, with patience, with the quiet strength to let truth arrive when it's ready. And in that moment, standing under the stars, the valley wrapped around me like an old friend again. I realized something. Karma had already done its work. Have you ever thought something was over only to find out it was just the eye of the storm? That's how it felt in the weeks after the courtroom victory. The silence fooled me at first. The absence of trucks, notices, and police calls felt like peace. But peace built on someone else's pride breaking doesn't last long. Pride always fights back. It started small. A broken fence post at the edge of my property splintered as if someone had kicked it in the night. Then came the paint, thick red streaks across the mailbox, dripping like blood under the morning sun. I cleaned it off, told myself it was kids' mischief, coincidence, but I knew better. And then came the letters, not forged violation notices this time, anonymous threats scrawled in uneven handwriting. You don't belong here, get out before it gets worse. No return address. Just venom folded neatly into envelopes slipped under my door. Fear has a way of creeping back in through cracks you thought you sealed. Every creak of the cabin made me sit up straighter. Every howl of a coyote at night made me wonder if it was really just an animal. The valley that had once felt like sanctuary now pulsed with tension, shadows stretching longer than they should. But what people like her never understand is that fear can sharpen a person too. Instead of retreating, I began documenting everything. Every broken post, every letter, every strange car parked too long near the tree line. My lawyer told me, she's digging her own grave, just keep collecting the evidence. The more desperate she gets, the clearer her pattern becomes. And desperate was exactly what she became. One evening, as dusk settled and the creek sang low in the background, I heard footsteps on gravel. Not cautious, bold, heavy. I stepped onto the porch and there she was, standing just beyond the gate, arms crossed, no sunglasses this time. Her eyes locked on me, sharp, unblinking. "You think this is over?" she said, her voice low, trembling with fury. I stayed quiet, watching her, the silence pressing between us. "This valley isn't yours, it never was. You forged something, paid someone off, I'll prove it." Her words spat like sparks, desperate, frantic. I almost pitied her in that moment. Almost. Because beneath the rage, I saw what was really there, fear. Not fear of me, but fear of losing control. Fear of being nobody in a place where she had crowned herself queen. "You can't fight the truth," I finally said, my voice steady, quieter than hers but heavier somehow. Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "Truth is what people believe, and I'll make them believe you're a fraud." She turned on her heel and stormed off, gravel crunching under her shoes until the night swallowed her whole. After that, the attacks escalated. Complaints filed with the county, everything from noise violations to environmental damage. Inspectors showed up again and again, each time leaving empty-handed, apologetic. "She's persistent," one of them muttered under his breath, shaking his head as he got back into his truck. But it wasn't just officials anymore. Neighbors who had begun warming to me now grew cold again. Rumors resurfaced, darker this time. Whispers that I had bribed the judge, that my documents were fake, that I was scheming to take over the entire valley and force people out. And all the while she watched, from her SUV at the edge of the road, from her porch across the ridge. Her presence was constant, pressing, suffocating. One night I woke to the sound of an engine. Headlights flashed across the cabin walls. I grabbed my coat, stepped outside, and saw her SUV idling at the end of the drive. The door was open. She stood beside it, packing, phone in hand. She was calling someone, her voice carried across the still night. Yes, I saw him, he's armed, he's threatening me right now, send someone fast." I stood frozen, breath sharp in my chest. She wasn't just lying anymore. She was manufacturing danger, setting the stage for disaster. If the wrong officer believed her, if the wrong call went through, one misunderstanding could cost me everything, even my life. I called my lawyer that night, voice tight with urgency. He listened, silent, then said the words I hadn't wanted to hear. "It's time to file a restraining order. Enough is enough." The next day, papers were drawn, evidence stacked thick. Photos, letters, witness accounts. Every piece of her obsession laid bare. And as I signed my name at the bottom of the petition, I realized something. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was defending my dignity, my right to live without fear. But when she was served with the order, her reaction wasn't shame. It was rage. She stormed into town, shouting in the middle of the diner, claiming I was corrupt, that the valley was hers, that she would burn everything down before letting me win. And for a moment, I wondered if she really might. Because obsession doesn't fade when truth wins. It twists deeper, darker, until it consumes everything. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind whip through the pines, and I thought about how strange life is. You can move to the quietest place on earth, surround yourself with mountains and streams, and still find yourself at war. Not with bullets, not with fists, but with lies. And yet, I also thought about something else. Maybe this was the final test. Maybe the valley wasn't just a gift, it was a challenge. a place meant to strip away illusions, to force me to stand firm, to remind me of something my father once said. Land doesn't just give you freedom, it asks you what you're willing to do to keep it. As I drifted to sleep, one truth settled deep in my chest. She could rage, she could lie, she could paint me as a villain until her voice was hoarse. But the valley would not bend to her, because the valley was mine. And the deeper she dug herself into her obsession, the closer karma drew its final curtain. Do you know the sound of silence before something breaks? It's not peaceful, it's heavy, thick like the air itself knows what's about to happen. That's the silence I woke to one night long after the restraining order had been filed. The valley was still, no coyotes, no owls, just the restless creak of old timbers. And then, the shatter of glass. I bolted upright. The cabin window nearest the kitchen had exploded inward, shards glittering across the floor like cruel stars. The air smelled sharp, chemical, smoke. My heart pounded as I grabbed a blanket, smothering the small flame that licked up from a shattered bottle. She'd thrown something through my window, not just a rock, a Molotov cocktail. My hands trembled as the fire hissed out beneath the blanket. The smoke cleared, but the truth didn't. She was no longer just trying to intimidate me. She was trying to destroy me. I ran outside. Headlights flared at the edge of the property. Her SUV again, the engine growling like some restless beast. She stood beside it, face lit in the glow, and I could see her hand shaking, not with fear, but with rage so deep it looked almost like madness. "You don't belong here," she screamed into the night. "This land is mine, mine." Her voice cracked, echoing through the pines, bouncing off the mountains, sounding less like a human cry and more like something feral. I shouted back, my voice raw. "You're going to ruin your own life. Walk away before it's too late." But she didn't move, didn't blink, and then her SUV's tires spat gravel as she lunged back into the driver's seat. The engine roared, headlights slicing through the dark as the vehicle jerked forward, straight toward my cabin. The world slowed. The crunch of rocks, the grinding scream of tires, the blinding beams. I braced myself, certain she meant to ram through the front porch, to take me down along with the home she hated so much. But at the last second, she swerved, skidding sideways, the SUV fishtailing until it slammed into my fence with a metallic groan. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I approached cautiously, heart hammering. The SUV door swung open. She stumbled out, disheveled, hair wild, eyes glassy with rage or maybe despair. She held something in her hand. For a moment, under the shifting glow of headlights, I thought it was another bottle. But it was a phone. She was live streaming. Her voice shook as she screamed into the camera. "Look at this man. He's stealing from us. He forged papers. He bribed judges. He's dangerous. Look at what he's doing to me." She turned the phone toward me, her voice rising in hysterical sobs. "He tried to burn me out. He tried to kill me." The absurdity nearly broke me. She attacked me. Yet here she was, painting herself as the victim for the world to see. And then I heard it. Sirens, wailing through the valley, bouncing off the mountains, growing louder by the second. My blood ran cold. For the third time, cops were being called to my cabin. But this time was different. There was shattered glass, a wrecked SUV, smoke lingering in the night air. The scene was chaos, and if they believed her story, if even one officer thought I was the aggressor, my life could flip in an instant. I forced myself to stand tall, hands visible, breath steady as the cruisers pulled in. Blue and red lights washed over the pines, over her, over me. Officers jumped out, tense, shouting orders. She ran toward them, wild, pointing at me. "Arrest him. He tried to kill me. He set fire to my house. He's insane." But the officers didn't rush me. They didn't handcuff me. They didn't even raise their voices at me. Instead, one turned slowly toward her, eyes narrowing. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "we've been down this road before." Confusion flickered across her face. "No, you don't understand. He. But another officer cut her off. "We saw the order. We saw the evidence. Tonight we saw your car tear through his fence. We see the fire damage. Enough is enough." And in that moment, for the first time, the mask cracked. She froze, the fight draining out of her all at once, leaving only a hollow shell where pride had once burned so brightly. "No," she whispered, voice trembling. "This valley was mine. It was supposed to be mine." The cuffs clicked around her wrists, the sound sharp and final echoing through the still night. She didn't fight this time, didn't scream, didn't even look at me as they led her away. She just stared at the ground as if the earth itself had betrayed her. The SUV was towed. The fire inspectors came, reports were written, photos taken. And when the last cruiser's lights disappeared down the dirt road, the valley was quiet again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one wasn't heavy, it wasn't tense, it was free. I walked back into the cabin, glass crunching under my boots. The damage was real, but the fear was gone. For the first time, I felt like the valley had spoken, not with words, but with justice. And as I looked out across the moonlit fields, I thought of something simple. People spend their lives trying to own things they were never meant to hold. But land, history, truth, they can't be stolen by lies. They can only reveal who we really are when the fight comes. And that night, the valley revealed everything. Have you ever noticed how quiet feels different once the storm passes? Not like the silence before trouble, thick, suffocating. This one is lighter, air you can breathe again. For the first time since I set foot in the valley, the quiet felt like home. Days passed, then weeks. The sheriff called me one afternoon, his voice steady, matter-of-fact. Karen had been charged arson, harassment, violation of a court order, reckless endangerment. Her lawyers tried to paint her as misunderstood, stressed, even unstable. But the evidence spoke louder than excuses. The valley had a memory now, one carved in broken glass and burned wood, and it told the truth better than any witness. She wouldn't be coming back. The news rippled through the nearby town. At first, people whispered in the diner, avoiding my eyes, unsure of which story to believe. But as the facts piled up, as photos and reports came out, the whispers changed. Heads nodded. Some even walked up to me, offering small words that felt heavier than they looked. "You didn't deserve any of that. She had us fooled for a long time. I'm glad you stood your ground." And with every word, the weight lifted, not all at once, but slowly. One afternoon, I stood on the porch with coffee in hand, the valley stretching out before me, the creek glinting in the sun. I thought about everything I had gone through, the lies, the threats, the nights I lay awake wondering if peace was just a dream. And I realized something simple. It had all been a test. Not a test of ownership, not of documents or deeds, but of dignity. Anyone can hold land. Few can stand for it when the world tries to strip it away. That night, as the sun sank behind the ridges and the sky burned orange, I walked down to the creek. The water moved slow, steady, like it always had. And for the first time, I let myself breathe deep and full, without fear of what was lurking in the shadows. The valley was mine again, not because of a judge, not because of paper, but because I had endured. And in that stillness, I thought about Karen. What drives a person to destroy themselves trying to control what was never theirs? Was it pride, fear, loneliness? Maybe all of it. I didn't feel anger anymore, not even hatred, just pity. Because in the end, her fight had revealed the truth not just about me, but about her. She wanted to be queen of a place that had no crown. And when the valley chose its king, it wasn't because of power or money. It was because of resilience. Weeks later, I rebuilt the broken fence, paneled the shattered window, scrubbed the last of the smoke from the cabin walls. And as I worked, I thought about something my father once said. Land remembers the hands that keep it. Maybe that was why I felt so tied to this valley. It wasn't just dirt or water. It was memory. My hands had rebuilt here, defended here, bled here. And in return, the valley had stood with me when lies came to burn it down. One evening, a neighbor came by, a man who had once avoided me in the diner when rumors swirled. He leaned against his truck, eyes scanning the land before settling on me. "You know," he said, "for a long time we thought she was untouchable, but you didn't back down, not once." I didn't know what to say. Words felt small compared to the journey, so I just nodded. He smiled faintly. "Guess the valley always did belong to you." And then he drove off, dust trailing behind him, leaving me with a truth I hadn't realized I'd been waiting to hear. That night I stood again on the porch, the stars scattered endless above, and I thought about everything. The chaos, the courtroom, the shattered glass, the fire, and I thought about the lesson buried in it all. Karma doesn't always strike like lightning. Sometimes it works slow, like water carving stone, steady and relentless, until what's false crumbles under its own weight. Karen thought she could bend truth, twist it, weaponize it, but truth is patient. And when it arrived, it didn't need me to shout or fight or rage. It needed me to stand. And standing was enough. So I recently went through the hardest battle of my life. Not with fists, not with guns, but with lies, pride, and fear. And what I learned is something I'll carry with me as long as I live. The strongest ground you'll ever stand on isn't land, it's dignity. And when you refuse to let anyone take that from you, you already own the valley. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.